Hi there, this is Matt Heffernan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to do the 5th episode of my series on the XCI tutorial. Of course, XCI, if you haven't seen this series so far, I would recommend go back and watch from the first episode or some of the other videos I've uploaded on it. But it's a adventure game engine for the Commander X16 retrocomputer. And I've gone through in the previous episodes some of the other different ways of developing the games, the different parts of the games that you have to put together, and today we're going to be talking about the inventory. Now, of course, a lot of adventure games have the concept of an inventory because in general these games require you to go out, explore the world of the game, and find different items that you need to keep on your person, and then you use those items to accomplish other tasks, or perhaps there's this one sort of MacGuffin end item that you have to acquire to win the game. And that's what we have for you right here. Is what you see on this slide is the view of the inventory control that comes with the example game, if you've seen some of the previous videos. And today we're going to show you how we can sort of build this out from scratch using the really basic template version. But first we're going to talk a little bit about how we configure those inventories. Now we can see here in this red text we have called out the different keys that are in the inventory file. Now if we go back here into our code, if you remember in the main file, we call out the menu file. In this case it's menu.xci, that's what's in the template. Of course you can name these whatever you want. Then in your menu file, if you choose to have inventory, of course inventories are not required. You could write a whole game without an inventory and that's fine. But if you do, then there's the inventory key in the menu file, and then that points to that configuration. In the template it's inv.xci. And this is the very basic inventory control. That's the default in the template. It doesn't do a whole lot. It just uses the basic tiles that come with it. If you've seen the earlier videos, you'd see that the basic tile set, I will go over here into this spreadsheet, and there's tile 0, which is the black or transparent tile, and 1 is the plain white, and those are the only ones that are defined by default in the template. You're going to have to define any tiles beyond that, or take them from the example game, and we're going to be doing a lot of that sort of stealing in this video. We're taking a lot of stuff from the example game and just copying and pasting it into this into the template to just use part of it. So anyway, what we would see here is a lot of these different keys, the values are calling out tile indexes. And you'll see a lot of 1s in there, so it's just using that plain white tile in a lot of it. So let's take a look at what some of these are. Now the first one is invdim, which we'll see here defines the dimensions of the overall control. And so here we have the whole control is 38 tiles wide. That can be up to 40 because we only have a 40 tile wide display, and 4 is the maximum height because we don't want the inventory to creep up on top of the game image, at least with the way that everything's set up here, so that anytime you view the inventory, you're only going to be hiding the text field at the bottom. So here 38 by 4, so 38 tiles wide, 4 tiles high. And then within that, we can define a number of controls, a number of buttons, basically for different inventory items. So what we can fit in there depends on how many tiles we use for some of these things. But we can see here the tiles that do get used are all denoted by these different keys. There's an inventory left margin. This defines a pair of tiles here where we're basically taking this tile that has that's gray with a darker gray on one side and then sort of flipping that over, and that is this 2 tile wide left margin. Right before here is one of the actual inventory item controls, and we have the button for that item, And then you can see here next to the button is the inventory right margin, and here this is defined as a single tile, and you'll notice this is going all the way down. It's using this same tile just like it's using these pair of tiles going all the way down. And then we have the actual inventory quantity. Again, this is all real optional. Pretty much everything here is optional. You don't have to have these margins. The inventories can just be the actual buttons for those inventories, and you could just leave the quantities to your imagination, or just have every item just only have a possible quantity of 1. That is all perfectly acceptable, however you want to structure your game. But here we're showing a 4-digit display for the inventory quantity. That's what this 4 is. The first value for inventory quantity is the text style, and here we're using text style 1, which, if you've seen previous videos, in the template that is defined as white on black. Of course, you can change that to be whatever you want, or you could use any of the 4 text styles that you define for the game, 0 being the menu text style, and then text styles 1 through 3 that are intended for the text field at the bottom of the screen. And then, so that defines sort of what the inventory item is. So each item will have this sort of space unto itself, and it's got the button and that right margin and the quantity, and that's sort of how we define how big those items are. Then we have up here the inventory quantity margin. That defines the tiles that are going above the quantity, and that's only required if we have a inventory item dimensions that are higher than 1. So here we're using a 2 by 2. So we can see here 2 by 2 inventory items. So inventory quantities can only be 1 tile high, so that means we're going to need a margin defined to put some sort of tiles above that. And here we're choosing, again, plain gray tiles, just like we are for the inventory right margin. And just like we are here for empty, and the inventory empty button, if you have a slot on your inventory control for which we do not have enough inventory items to fill, here we can see that this inventory control has room to show 8 items at once, but we only have 7 items in our inventory, so we need to have an empty inventory item, and so we need to define what tiles to use for an empty button. And here it's again just that plain light gray tile, just 4 of them, because again we have a dimension of 2 by 2. And then we have here at the far right end the scroll bar. Now the scroll bar will be preceded by the scroll margin. Here we're using a single column, and we're using this same tile that we used over here with the darker gray on one side, but we're only using 1 of them. And then we have the inventory scroll, where we define an up button, a down button, and those are each going to be a single tile, and then the tiles that go in between. There's 1 tile that can go in between, and again, using that plain gray. Didn't go really all out on the design of that example, but as we will see with the template, we even go less out. So here we can see for the inventory dimension, it is 9 by 2, a lot smaller than 38 by 4. And then the inventory item dimensions are 1 by 1, so that's just a single tile for each of those buttons instead of 4. And then we're using that 1, which is the white, plain white tile. And then all these margins are still 1, 1. And inventory quantity is still going to be the same, where it's going to use text style 1, the white on black, and it's going to be, again, 4 digits wide. And then inventory margin, we're setting it to 1, but we're not actually going to use that, at least with this current configuration, because the inventory item dimension has a height of only 1 itself, so that will never actually be rendered. And then we here for the scroll, we define new tiles here. We're just using, as we'll see up here, a caret and an uppercase V, which are ASCII codes 94 and 86 respectively. And then again, we're defining the middle, but since it's only going to be 2 tiles high, this in-between tile won't get rendered. So we're just going to see a V, caret and a V. And then the only item we define is money. And again, you don't have to have money in your game. You want to be some sort of communist paradise or something where nobody has to pay for anything. You can totally do that. Now, Star Trek didn't have money. You don't have to have money. But I just have that in there as sort of a placeholder item that you can go ahead and change. And so by default, I say that money, you start out with 100 monies, and then you can have a maximum of 9,999 monies because we're only using a 4-digit display. We don't want to overflow that. And then we use 0 for the cursor, which is the default mouse cursor. Again, if we look here at our sprites, that's that default mouse cursor there, just a plain old mouse cursor looking mouse cursor. And then we go, whoops, we go back here and say 36 is the tile that we use for the button. And 36 is, if you're familiar with the ASCII table, the $sign is 36 decimal. And that's it. So what's that actually look like? Well, it's not too pretty. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run, and if you've seen the previous videos, you saw how we created that. And then we go down here, and there's that toolbar that we created in the a couple episodes ago in the menu tutorial. And then we see here our inventory button, and there's that beautiful inventory. Not a lot to look at. Pretty much how I described. You have a single row for the inventory item. We only have one item in there, so there's this bottom row doesn't have anything in it. But we have an empty quantity display. We have an empty button here, which again is that white tile. And then up here is our money. And if we click on money, it doesn't change the mouse cursor, even though right now we could be paying for something, but we have no way to really denote that. We'd probably want to have a custom mouse cursor for dishing our money out. But we don't really see what that looks like. And we could scroll if we had more than one item in here, but we have a 2-item high control and only one item in there, so scrolling, I can click on that. Yeah, it's not going to do anything. So let's change that up a bit. So how can we make this a little nicer looking? Well, let's make it more like the example game. We're just going to start pilfering all these graphics. So what we're going to do is make it so that we can have sort of a, we'll keep it at 2 high, but we're going to make it so that rather than just a single item wide, we're going to make it 2 items wide. Well, how do we do that? And it seems a little complex because you have all these different factors in there, and we look at here how everything works out to being 4 items wide. Well, this is where the math part comes in. Now, if somebody told you there wasn't going to be math, they were lying to you. Now, don't get too scared by these equations. They're very simple. But basically, we want to be able to, if we're going to have 2 columns, that means that this equation has to hold. So that the actual width of the overall inventory dimension minus the scroll margin size plus 1. So we have a scroll margin of 1. And of course another one. And why is that in there? Well, that's because here in scroll margin could be more than 1 tile wide, but here it was just 1 tile wide. And then we have another for this the actual in scroll. The scroll bar is 1 tile wide. So we have to chop off basically these 2 columns at the end, and then we have the rest of it. So here, in this case, we're at 38 tiles. We really only are talking about 36 tiles that we can work with. And then page down here, and then we have the left margin size, which we know is 2, and the item dim width, which is 2. Again, we're talking about the actual item itself is only 2 tiles wide for the button. and then the size of the right margin, which is just 1, and then the width of the quantity, which, as you remember, was 4. We had 4 digits in that quantity display. And that all works out to be exactly 4. But we do have this floor function on the outside, so that if you had to find the actual item dimensions to be a little wider than it needed to be, say if instead of up here, if I said instead of 38 by 4, it was 40 by 4, well, the SDK is smart enough so that when it tries to compile your configuration, it says, oh, well, you can't really fill up that many with the way you configured it, so it's really only going to be 38 wide. And just sort of smooth that over for you. And then the same thing with the rows. Here we are looking at the dim height, which is the overall height of the inventory control, and then that's going to be divided by the dimension height of the item itself. And here we've talked about a 4 item, or for a 4 tile high control and a 2 tile high button, so we're going to have 2 rows, so 4 columns and 2 rows, and that's how we work it. So in order to get that instead to be 2 columns and just 1 row, we're keeping the indim height and the item dim height both the same. In this case, it's going to be 2. So, and then for the columns, we're going to want to make it so that for arc button, it's going to be a bit smaller. We're instead of using a left margin that's 2 tiles wide, we're going to use a single tile, and then a 2 tile wide button again, so we can reuse those graphics. A single tile wide right margin, but in this case we are going to up the quantity of our width of our quantity display to 5 digits, because under the hood we're actually using a 16-bit integer to store these quantities, so your maximum value for any sort of quantity can be 65,535. That one of those wonderful magic numbers that you have in there, aka FFFF. And that's what we have to work with. So math-wise, that works out to, well, if we're going to have all of that, that's going to actually come out to be 20 tiles wide. So that we're chopping off those 2 at the end. So it's 18. Then we're going to have a 9 tile wide control for each inventory item. But we're only going to be 2 high, and that's going to just fit that 1 row in there. And then here again, we're going to do a 2 by 2 for those items, so we can reuse those graphics. But now, well, what are we going to use for empty space? Well, again, the white looks kind of icky. We don't want to use that white. So what I went ahead and did already are to find some tiles. And here you can see the tiles that we created in earlier videos, but starting at tile 11, I still had some availability, so I made tile 11 just a light gray plain white tile, and then created some other ones that are going to be useful for this control. I created one with a darker gray line, sort of down the middle, a little closer to the right side. And then a tile 13, it's all filled in, so half of it is the darker gray on the right. And then tile 14, we'll see here, rather than using those carets and V's, here's a nice little arrowhead that we can use for a scroll bar. But you'll notice here, unlike the earlier one, I have a little foot room at the bottom. And that'll allow us to stack them up so that I have this flipped vertically underneath it, and I'll have a little gap between them so that they're not all sort of smushed together. So we're going to go ahead and use those tiles like that. So for an empty, we're going to use that tile 11, which was plain light gray, but we're going to need 4 of them now. So it'll just be 4 2 by 2 of those light gray tiles. The left margin, we're going to use that tile 12. and basically as is. You remember tile 12, here's that little line going down the middle, so we'll still sort of have that kind of look where there's sort of a line going down in the middle of that margin, but it's going to be only one tile wide now. And then here for the right margin, we're going to use that 11 again. Just want to have that plain gray. We're going to up that quantity to 5. And now we are going to be using that quantity margin because we have a this invitem div is the height is now 2, so we're going to need that. So we'll go ahead and make that 11 again, plain gray. And now for the scroll, what I can use is here this tile 14 that we've defined. So the top is going to be as is 14. In between would be 11, and we're just going to go ahead and fill that in there just in case we ever decided to make this control taller. But we're not actually going to see that. And then we need to flip that tile 14 vertically, so 14V. And then finally for in scroll margin, this is where that tile 13 comes in. If you remember, that's that half and half one. And so this will give us a sort of a 4 pixel thick line on the edge of the scroll bar, so separating the scroll bar from the rest of the control. And so if I save that, go ahead and rebuild our game. Oh, what did I do? Item money has the wrong number of tiles. Oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to fix that before we do anything. So yeah, here we're only using a single tile, 36, which is that $sign. Now let's actually make this look like something real. So look at this. Here's those tiles that we had in the example game of this little dollar bill. So tiles 15 and 16, and if you use 15 and 16 sort of flipped vertically in reverse order, because we have this sort of diagonally symmetrical $sign, which makes it a little easier to render. We only need 2 tiles to render all 4. So that means instead of that $sign, we will have 15 and then 16, and then the bottom row starts with 16 flipped horizontally and vertically, and then 15 flipped horizontally and vertically. And there we go. And we'll just go ahead and keep those quantities values there for now. Let's go ahead and build that again. No errors. That means we did everything perfectly. All right. Now, of course, we didn't change the toolbar, but we bring the inventory. Oh, look, that's a lot nicer. So now, instead of being stacked on top of each other, we still only have 2 inventory items visible at one time, but they are side by side. And we have the money. But I click on that money, and I still don't change the cursor. So that's not good. But now you can see here, I've got that 5-digit wide display. I've got this much thinner divisions for the left margins, and then that nice thick line there next to the scroll bar. So let's build this out a bit more. So to take advantage of that 5-digit display, if you've been playing with the X16 for a while, this should be a familiar number, $38,655. That's what you're going to get. And let's say then that our maximum that we can hold in our wallet is 50 grand. We got a big wallet here. And then this third digit, this third value, is for the actual cursor that we use. And we don't want to use that plain default cursor here, sprite 0. We want to just reuse this money cursor that we used before, which is frame 3. So we're going to make that number 3. And let's see what that looks like. We're going to build that, run that up, and show the inventory, and oh, there we go. Nice fully stocked display. I click on the money, oh, and there I get my money cursor. Just like here, if I click on the hand, I get my hand cursor. All right. So we can do a whole lot there. Now we've got money that we can spend. But let's take a look here at a little more of this stuff so you can better understand it. Now, if you want to go back and scrutinize these equations, you go right ahead. And here I also put in this slide. And again, like with all these videos, all these slides are up on the repository. You go to the README. The link is going to be in the description for how to get to the actual repository on GitHub. You can read through all the documentation. If we go up here to the main documentation here, I talk all about the inventory file, have some nice text that you can read through, and it shows how the example inventory is built out and explains in detail what each of these keys are for. And then if you go over here into the syntax documentation, then you can see here we have the inventory file keys, and here they all are in a nice little table. I can go right to invdim, and there it explains here what all the different ranges and everything are for all of the different values for these keys. And that should help you definitely be able to do this for real once you actually get your hands on it. So then here I have just a little more math showing that, all right, in reality, you have some extreme cases of how you can lay out these inventories, and these are those minimum and maximum values that you can have for each of them. And now let's talk a bit more about items, because we want to add some more items in there. We didn't make a scrollable 2-item visible at a time displays, but with only 1 item possible in our inventory, that's not too useful. So what you can have are up to 127 different kinds of items. So of course, obviously, like we saw with money, we could have a very large quantity of money. We could have that, $50,000 in our wallet, and so that of course doesn't count against that 127, as money is one thing. But you can have a pretty involved inventory, even when you talk about something as varied as Minecraft. You do have more than 127 different kinds of items, but in reality, once your personal inventory isn't even close to that big. And so that 127 should be good enough to do most basic kinds of adventure games. And what you can then have are like I said before, the inventory quantity of which is the max field here. Inv item name is going to be the identifier. We already used money as a name. Init is the initial quantity. Max is the maximum quantity that you can have. And of course, with 16 bits, this is the biggest 16-bit integer, so that's going to be your hard limit for a max. If you put something bigger than that, you're not going to have a good time. You're going to have a max that's somewhere below that. And then the cursor can be any sprite index. It doesn't have to be something that just looks like a mouse cursor. You can have it look however you want. And then you have the actual tiles, and that's going to be those item dim dimensions, which we've now defined as 2 by 2. That means we need to have 4 tiles defined in there. And that's, of course, what this little equation tells you here, that the size of the number of tiles that you define for this key for each item has to equal the product of the item dim dimensions here, the width and height. So let's add some more items, and we're just going to reuse the ones that we had before. And one of the items that plays an outsized role is the banana. And here we have 3 tiles that make up the banana in terms of the inventory item button. And then here we have frame 4 is the mouse cursor for the banana. So let's go ahead and just add the banana as a possible inventory item. So to do that, we're going to need inv item banana. And then we'll say in the beginning we only have 0 bananas. We can hold on to 8 bananas. 8's a lot of bananas to hold at one time. And we're going to use that sprite frame 4, which is that banana cursor with the little arrow on it. and then we're going to use the buttons, use the tiles for the button. Now here we only have 3 tiles defined because the upper left, that first tile, can just be that plain gray tile, which is tile 11, as we've used many times before. And then we use the rest of 17 through 19, 17, 18, 19. And then we need to have another item, because monies and bananas, that would take up that whole row. But if we want to do some scrolling, we're going to have a third item in our inventory. And what we shall reuse is the MacGuffin item from the example game, which of course is the Holy Grail. What else are you going to have it be? And for that we use, again, reuse these tiles. Tiles 24 and 25, the Grail is perfectly vertically symmetrical, so we'll be able to just use those 2 tiles to define the whole thing. Again, we only have we have no grails at the beginning. There is only 1 grail. And then we will use sprite 5. Now for the cursor, well, we also use this sprite to sort of place it. Now, if you see the example game, there is an actual mouse cursor version of that. I'm not bothering with that, because just to show that you could use any sprite. And if you want your inventory item cursors to just look like a regular sprite that you're just kind of moving around the screen, you can totally do that. It doesn't have to look like a mouse cursor. And of course, it just makes this a little easier to implement. So there we have that. So frame 5 for the mouse cursor, and then we're going to have the button. Let's go back there and see again. So 24 and 25. We're going to have 24. We need to flip it horizontally, and then 25 and flip that horizontally. So get back down here. 24, 24H horizontally. 20. Oops, not 35. 25, and then 25 flipped horizontally, and we'll save that off. And now that will have all of our items defined. So if you again went back and saw some of the other videos, I had created some 2 very basic levels. One that's just sort of a hello world, and that automatically goes into another one that says we're here, and then that was it. So now if you've been sort of spying this side of the screen over here on the right, you'll see that I added a bit more code to that. So now what I do is put a little text that says, hey, buy something, will ya? And then puts out some tiles and a sprite. And the sprite doesn't actually move, it's just sitting there. So what are these sprites? Well, the tiles, that's that famous banana tile. This is the bunch of 3 bananas, and those will be very familiar if you play the example game or if you saw the videos for it. And let me get rid of that. Let's see here. So 20 and 21, 22 and 23. That's our bunch of 3 bananas, and we're going to place that starting at position 5, 5, and then 5, 6. Of course, these are tiles, so these are tile indexes that are based on tile positions, not pixel positions. And then for the sprite, we want to just place the Grail on there, and we're just going to use that Grail sprite. We're not going to define separate tiles for it. So here, because again with the button, we want something that has a transparent background, and we don't want to reuse this one that just has a gray background. So we're just going to use the sprite, and we're going to place it next to the bananas, and that's here, sprite frames 1. So we're going to use sprite index 1, and we're going to use palette offset 0, and we're going to use frame 5, and then place that at pixel position 9640, which would be the same as tile position 12.5. So at the same level horizontally with the bananas. And then I'm going to put some triggers in there. And we can see here I have the default action only define the single tool action in this template so far in this for this tutorial, which is use. So if I just click on those bananas, it tells me the price. Same thing with the grail, but I have a little logic in there. So if only fires if you don't have the grail already. And then here for inventory items, the item triggers are what use these inventory items, and here we're going to use money to buy these items. And so we said here bananas are 3 for $1. So here we have a money trigger, and it has a requirement and a cost of $1. And that uses that same 5566 area as the use, which are those tiles that show the bananas, and it will print a little text, and then it will add 3 bananas to your inventory. That's what the get item does. And then down here we have for those pixels with where we have the sprite. Like I said before, that relates to the tile position 12.5. And so now here we have those 4 tiles. If you click on those with the money cursor, then if you haven't gotten it already, it will get a single grail, put that in your inventory, and it will set that state got grail so that won't happen again, and then it will hide that sprite, so you can only get that grail one time. And then the text will come up and says, hey, you got the grail, and we can call that winning the game at this point. So let's go ahead and build that and run it. So now we're going to do a new game. There's that hello world first level, and now here's that new second level. So here we have, again, we can use that use cursor. It tells us those the information. Bananas are 3 for $1. Grail's 1 easy payment of $9,000, $9,999. All right. So let's go down here, our toolbar. Here's our inventory control, and we've got all that money. So let's use some money to buy a banana. And then it tells us, hey, enjoy your bananas. So look, let's go down here. Hey, we got 3 bananas. Let's buy some more bananas. Remember our inventory, as we saw over here, the item, you can have up to 8 bananas. So we can go ahead and spend that money on 3 more bananas. And we just did, and now we're up to 6. Now here you can see, well, I can only buy bananas 3 at a time, and I have 6, and I only go up to 8. So what this will happen is if you do something like that where you're doing a get item and the quantity will take you beyond what the maximum value is, it will still cap you at that maximum value. So now you can see we've paid for 9 bananas, but we can only hold on to 8. And that's just a restriction in the game that you can totally make whatever arbitrary thing you want. And now, oh, luckily we still have enough money that we can buy a grail. So let's go buy a grail. And there we go. Oh, we got the grail. But let's see in our inventory. Well, we're not going to see the grail there, but we can now scroll down, and there's the grail. All right. And now we can see those cursors. So like, hey, there's that banana cursor, and it's got the little arrow on it. So it's easier to say, hey, I can put a banana on a banana. It does nothing. There's no trigger defined for that. And likewise, I can do the same for the grail, but like before with the grail, it's that same, very same sprite frame that was placing it right about there, and there's no arrow on that. And you can just kind of use it as is, but again, no triggers for this item, so it's not going to do anything. But if I go back and click the use item, that gets us back to the use cursor, and we can, again, get the price of bananas. And that's basically it. That's how inventories work. And again, if you've ever been playing any of these kind of games over the past 40 years, you kind of understand how inventories work. But it's just, if you do want to have inventories in your game, you can totally do that, and that's pretty much how you do it. Now, if you like this video, please go ahead and actually click on that thumbs up, and you can go ahead and get into the GitHub, and you can see all this wonderful documentation. You can go ahead and see the code right here. There are several releases out already. Beta version 0.3 is out there. There are existing issues with that, and the master is ahead of that, but I would definitely recommend starting with a beta version. And I'll be putting out a new beta version pretty soon here to take care of some of these more recent issues. So probably maybe by the time you see it, that release will already be out. So you can go ahead and get that whenever you want. If you see an issue, please go ahead and put that up on GitHub here. Or if you want to fork it, you can see here, somebody's already forked it. You can go ahead and fork it and make your own changes and even do pull requests. You want to add some features to the engine, you go right ahead. And that's it. So please, like I said, like this video or dislike it. Doesn't matter. It's all engagement. That's all YouTube really cares about. And please go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and you can click on that bell and get notified whenever I put up new videos, either the next one in this series or perhaps another demo of some of the other stuff. A lot of the stuff I'm posting up these days is related to the Commander X16. I'm very excited about that, and I hope you are too. And I hope that you take this time. Again, this is another quarantine episode, the time that you have right now to spend at home, that you're using that productively to do something that is fun and creative, and maybe have something that you can look back at this time and say, hey, I didn't just sit around and watch TV all day. I actually made something that I'm proud of and I shared with the world. So that's my, again, my wish to you, and I will see you again shortly. Thank you. Bye-bye.